Hello, everyone. My name is Meredith Newmark. I'm the Senior Program Manager here at Atlas Core. Welcome to our U.S. Fellowship webinar. We're so excited to tell you a little bit more about our program and about what we're doing here. Let me just go over the agenda for the call today. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about Atlas Core itself. And then I'm going to go over some frequently asked questions that that we often hear from applicants, and so maybe I can answer them in advance and hear from you all. And then our alumni, Carolina Escobar, who served at Partners of the Americas, and she is from Colombia. She's back in DC for a while, and we will have her here shortly to tell us a little bit about her experience, what she learned from the fellowship, and what you could learn too. And then once we're done with all of that, we'll take questions from the audience. We're going to hold all questions to the end. I won't be checking the comments box in the middle. So if you can please just hold your questions till the end, and I'll see them. If you type them in the comments box, I'll be able to see them once you type them. So welcome. This is Carolina, who I just mentioned.
Hi, everybody.
So I'll kick it off with a description of Atlas Core, and then Carolina can tell us a little bit more about herself. Yes. So Atlas Core is an international network of nonprofit leaders and organizations. Our mission is to address critical social issues by developing leaders, strengthening organizations, and promoting innovation through an overseas fellowship of skilled nonprofit professionals. Atlas Core, we engage leaders committed to the nonprofit sector in 6 to 18-month professional fellowships at organizations to learn best practices, build organizational capacity, and then return home to create a network of global change makers. And the way it works is that fellows serve full-time at host organizations located in either the United States or Latin America. In this webinar, we'll be primarily talking about our United States fellowship. And fellows work on issues that complement their expertise. And furthermore, fellows also develop their leadership skills, and they share best practices, and they supplement the knowledge that they're gaining at their host organization with more theoretical and practical nonprofit management training through our Atlas Core Global Leadership Lab. Some of the benefits of the fellowship, besides the training that you receive through the host organization day-to-day, as well as our Global Leadership Lab training, is that we also cover a basic living stipend that covers food, shared housing, and local transportation. We also cover your international flight to and from the U.S., and we also sponsor your visa and cover the cost of that visa. So those are the benefits that we cover to make this fellowship possible. And the idea is that we're connecting the best nonprofit leaders in the world with some of the best nonprofit organizations in the world, and facilitating that international exchange so that the organization has a greater capacity, and also the fellow has greater capacity as well. Most fellowships are 12 months with the option to extend up to 18 months if both the fellow and the host organization agree on that. And so right now we're recruiting for our May class. We're still in the placement phase and selection process for our January 2014 fellowship. But right now, if people apply, we're accepting applications for our May 2014 fellowship, because we bring fellows 3 times a year, January, May, and September, for usually a 12-month fellowship. So apply now, and we accept applications year-round. Our priority deadline for this class is November 8th. So we encourage you to get your applications in soon. That's about a week and a half from now. And we look forward to your applications as well as your questions at the end of this webinar. So next up, I'd like to have Carolina tell us a little bit about herself and her experience in the fellowship.
First of all, thanks, Meredith, for this invitation, and thanks all of you for for joining us and for being interested in being an Atlas Corps Fellows. That's an amazing experience. And about my experience, I'm Carolina Escobar. I was Atlas Corps Fellow in Class 6. I started in March 2011, and I finished my fellowship in March 2012. And I'm proud of being part of the Atlas Corps alumni. That's a great network to improve your skills, still learning more, share your experiences, share your projects, and connect opportunities and organizations with whatever you're doing. And I feel very happy and proud to be part of that. Before I joined Atlas Corps, I was an entrepreneur in Colombia. I was creating my own company, and I was being volunteer for international organizations. And doing all that, I learned that it was more valuable for myself and for my professional profile, learning how to use my entrepreneurship skills to address critical and social issues in my community. So I was more focused. I started being more focused in teaching some communities in my countries how to create their own businesses and how to feel and enrich their entrepreneurial skills to be successful. And I'm talking about vulnerable people in Colombia, and I had training on like about 400 new entrepreneurs in sectors like Urabá, that's pretty urban and it's a very complicated sector in Colombia and other communities too. So yeah, I was being an entrepreneur since I remember, and I had to like train others and teach others what I was learning. But there was something missing because I was having already international connections with the organization I was volunteer for, which is Partners of the Americas. But there was a lot of things that I was missing from that experience because I didn't know how international organizations really work, what they think, how they think strategically, with what other organizations they work, how they think in addressing international issues that were happening in my country, and how can I join that and learn about that to really increase my impact locally in my country. So I found this opportunity with Atlas Corps, and I applied. And in my application, I was very honest and transparent about what was I expecting of my experience and what was my previous experience, so I can show really who I am. And it was a good opportunity because writing that application, I discovered a lot of things that myself I was not like very aware of, and I was feeling like very nice. Even if I don't pass this is already a lot of learning about myself and the things I have been doing. And then I had the notice that the news that I became an Atlas Corps Fellow, and I came here and I was serving for Partners of the Americas, which is the same organization I was being volunteering for, and that was great because I was already working with them, but now I was joining them here in Washington, D.C., learning about how, since this office, they manage everything and they create all these programs, and I was learning a lot. I was working in a project where I was promoting youth volunteering across the world, and I learned about the value of being volunteer and being social entrepreneur, and what really means in international projects and international cooperation. And I learned how to build lasting partnerships, like not the one next to my door, but international cooperation, how that works, what are the organizations that are interested in doing that for my country, what is the people who really move the opportunities up for the things I was interested in, and not only with my organization, but with Atlas Corp's training and the people they were bringing to our training. That's very valuable, and even the other fellows that are living with you this experience, you learn a lot from them, you meet a lot of people through them and through their organization. So that's something that really put a lot of things in my pockets and in my mind and in my hands that you even really don't notice that until you finish and you have your balance of your experience and you have a lot of things in your plate that you really need to start thinking very strategic about how are you going to use all those things that you got from this experience. So that experience with that organization, Partners of the Americas, and with Atlas Corp was a really good experience for me. I learned a lot. I had a lot of challenge, and I want to say this is not the easiest thing that you're gonna do in your life. It's very complicated because you have everything, but you are here living in a different country. You don't have your family, you don't have your friends, you have new job, you have new situation and really different situations to live every day. So that's stressful. Sometimes things happen, everywhere things happen, and you have to deal with that by yourself. But that brings you a better experience to get more mature for the next steps in your life. And sometimes when you're living this experience, you are very focused on that you don't notice what you are really learning. But at the end, you have a lot of things to be thankful and to be great and to share and to spread, and that's a lot. After finishing my fellowship, I went back to my country as it was a commitment, because if you don't extend, which is good too. I could extend because that was a proposal that my host organization proposed me, and I could extend, but I decided to go to my country and start working because I was really like, seriously, I wanna do all this and I wanna share all this and I wanna start doing something. So I went back to my country, and my host organization contracted me as consultant. So that was amazing because I could use then formally all their methodologies and all their programs and all what they were doing and transfer all that to my country and start building partnerships between the government, organizations, and individuals with my host organization to start expanding the impact that I was doing from here. So that was like the perfect situation I could have. But it was because since I started my fellowship, I was like being very focused in what I was doing. I was not like very distracted with the experience. And then at the end, if you do things like correctly and things very concentrated and what you really want to do, you at the end, I'm pretty sure you're going to have something very powerful for your life. So my invitation is that apply now. This is an opportunity that is, I mean, it's a great opportunity, but once you are a fellow, you have the power to make it awesome, and it depends on you. But start that experience applying it, because I bet you will love it.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Carolina. Thanks for that first-hand experience that to share with us. So now I'm going to get in some of the frequently asked questions that I hear from applicants all the time about how they can join the fellowship. And Carolina is going to ask me these questions, then I'll answer. And then at the end, we'll get to any more questions that are remaining. But hopefully we'll be able to answer some of your questions before you even ask them. So,
okay, so yeah. Meredith, how do I apply if I want to be a fellow?
Great question. So first, let me tell you what the eligibility requirements are so that you know whether you're even eligible to apply. One of the requirements is that all our fellows have a bachelor's degree or the equivalent, a 4 year degree, to be proficient in English, both spoken, written, and reading. And 2 to 10 years of experience. We'll get into that a little bit more later. Age 35 or under on the first day of the fellowship. So our fellows range from about age 23 to 35. The average age is around 28 or 29. And then you're committed to returning home at the end of the fellowship. And the application process is a three-step process. If you fit all those eligibility requirements. There's an online application, like Carolina mentioned, and it's pretty straightforward. You go over what your educational experience is, what your employment history is. You talk about what your skills and interest areas are, so that we can help match you with a host organization. And then there's 6 300-word essays. So they're not, super cumbersome long essays. They're pretty short essays. And once you fill out that whole online application, you press submit. And the next step, if you have a good application, you meet all our eligibility requirements, you have strong written English, we may move you on to the next round of the application process, which is an English test. And the English test is an hour-long written English test with 2 essay questions. Again, pretty straightforward. So you'd have an hour to do that English test. So that's the next phase. If you pass your English test, we think you have really excellent English, you may move on to the interview stage. And we do almost all our interviews by Skype with our Atlas Core Selection Board, which is a group of about 50 volunteers or so who conduct interviews as part of the Atlas Core network, and ask you a little bit more about your experience, and also explain some of the terms and conditions that go along with being an Atlas Core Fellow. So those are the 3 stages, and if you pass all 3, the English test, the interview, and you have a strong written application, you would become what we consider to be a finalist. That means that you have a strong enough application that we consider you eligible to be matched with host organizations. So then we go into our matching phase, and that's something that Atlas Core handles itself. We try and pair you with an organization that fits your skills and interests, and then you may have an interview with the host organization itself. So like Carolina had an interview with Partners of the Americas before being accepted. So those are the stages to becoming an Atlas Core Fellow.
Okay. And how long does the process take applying?
Yeah, so the application itself, filling out that application can take anywhere from a few hours to a few days of a few hours each. We've tried to design it to be not too burdensome, and I really encourage you to give it a shot. Even, just put in your application. It shouldn't take too long, and the overall selection process after you've submitted your application can take up to 4 to 5 months for a single application class. So, like I said, the priority deadline for our May class is November 8th. So that's a little over 5 months for the selection process from applying to having everything finalized. So it can take a while to go through the stages of the application process, to get your interviews, and to get a final decision. Strong candidates who make it to the finalist stage may be considered for up to a year after they applied, and placement can take several cycles. For example, May class, we may consider you for our September class or our January 2015 class. So you can still be considered a little bit longer, and we have had several placements where someone applied for an earlier class and then got accepted a year later. So it can take a while to be placed. We have far more qualified applicants than we do host organizations. So it can take a while. That being said, I want people to be clear that being a finalist is not the same thing as being accepted as a fellow. Just because you've been declared a finalist and maybe interviewing with host organizations doesn't mean that you've been officially accepted to the fellowship yet. And so sometimes I get the question, oh, I received another job offer. Should I turn it down because I'm still waiting to be placed with Alice Corps? Don't turn down other opportunities until you've received an official offer from Alice Corps. While we really love for you to keep your options open and stay with Alice Corps as a finalist, nothing's final, and we have a very small acceptance rate. It's very competitive, so don't turn down other opportunities until you've been officially accepted.
Okay, and how do I have enough experience for being a fellow?
Great question. This is one I hear a lot, when we say 2 to 10 years of social sector or nonprofit experience, what does that mean? At the minimum, we're looking for around 2 years of experience, but we have a pretty broad definition of what it means to have social sector experience. That can include working in your government on some kind of social issue. It could include teaching. It could include consulting. It could include being part of a social enterprise, so something that's a business and not technically a nonprofit, but if they have a social mission, that can be included. It can include significant volunteer experience. So I know a lot of countries have domestic service corps where people do like a year of service here in their country, and that could, if it's full-time volunteering, that can definitely be included in your 2 years of experience. And it could include, being a doctor or a nurse. If you're doing the kinds of things that that could be applied to the social sector. We've had fellows as young as 22 or 23 before, but they've had significant leadership experience. It's not just interns and internships and volunteering here and there. They've really proved themselves. We have this age range of around 22 to 35 because we want to have a group of a similar age cohort, a similar level of experience, and we've designed our training program to be of the best use to people in that age range. So sometimes people also ask, what if I'm over 35? And this fellowship may not be the most use to you because we've designed our training program for that mid-career professional. So that's kind of, it may not be as much use to you as it would to someone in that age range. And so, for-profit and business experience can also be relevant if it can also be applied to the social sector as well. So there's a broad range of experience that we're looking for, and about 2 to 10 years as far as the amount, in a broad range of issues that our fellows work on too, from the environment to education, social entrepreneurship, peace and conflict resolution, public health. There's so many issues that fellows work on. So, if you're unsure of whether your experience fits, I encourage you to email us at apply@alicecorps.org. But generally, the answer is going to be yes. It sounds like you have great experience, and you should just go ahead and apply, regardless of whether if you're unsure.
Okay. And when I'm sure that I have enough experience, how can I make sure that I have a good application and I put all that in my application?
Great. So first step would be to just double check, make sure you fit the eligibility requirements. The second thing would be to make sure the English in your application is really strong, and that you've expressed yourself clearly and concisely. It's always good to have, even if you have strong English, still have a friend another friend who speaks English well, read over it and just double check your language, just to make sure that you've expressed yourself and represented yourself as well as you could. I would always have someone read over my applications before I turn them in, so it's good to get a second look at it. To also be a good tip is to be detailed and have as much specifics as you can. So if you say that you're strong in volunteer management, If you can specify how many volunteers did you manage, what does it mean to manage them? Were you training them? Were you placing them with volunteer placements? What did you do? And if you say that grant writing is one of your strengths, how much money was that grant? How many grants have you applied for that have been successful? And did you manage those grants afterwards and do the don't just fill out the bare minimum and say this is the skill I have. Really sort of go into detail about how you have that skill and how it relates to your experience. And another thing I've seen related to the section on skills and interests is sometimes people describe the skill or the interest themselves more than describing their experience. So if the skill is fundraising, they may give me like a definition of fundraising. Fundraising includes grant writing, individual donor management, outreach. I think it may include these things. So, but that's not really what we're looking for. We're not looking for a definition of fundraising. We're looking for you to explain your experience related to that skill. Another thing I would mention with the essay questions, that first essay question is a biography of yourself. It's kind of just a brief one-paragraph biography, the kind of thing that you might see if you're looking at a website and they list their staff, the bio that they'd have on their About Us page. That's the kind of thing we're looking for, of sort of a brief description of your experience throughout your career. And it should be really strong. That's the first thing that most host organizations see from you. So we're really looking for a super strong, well-written biography of yourself. And we've actually written a tips sheet of a lot of advice that we've compiled of advice of how to make a really strong bio, and it's linked on the application. So there's in that question it'll say, read our biography requirements document. Do click on that link and read it and follow those tips as you're writing your biography, so that you can have a really strong first impression with host organizations. And then another essay question that trips people up a lot is the fifth essay question talks about your successes and failures, and really do try and think about something you're really proud of for your success, something that you something that you led and managed yourself, and then but also think about a failure that you've overcome. And this question, I think, is a little bit difficult for people from around the world. It's kind of like, I think it's in some sense a very American style question that sometimes can confuse people from other countries, because it's not typical in other countries to ask about failures and to express, talk about your failures in a positive way. But we really are looking for something that was difficult for you, some sort of challenge you had at work that you've overcome, or that, maybe you had an event that didn't go well, but what did you learn from it? So it's okay to talk about things that didn't go well. So be honest there. I often see the response, I haven't had any failures yet in my career, which simply isn't true. And it's actually better to tell us about a failure than to say that you haven't had failures. And the last piece of advice I'd give is to really sell yourself. Really think about, if you had 30 seconds to convince a host organization to accept you for the fellowship, what is the most important thing you want them to know about you? And that should be communicated clearly in your application. This is who I am. This is why you should take me as a fellow. That should be what every answer directs the reader to think about.
Nice. Yeah. And talking about host organizations, do I get to choose my host organization? Can I suggest my host organization if they are not in the list?
Great question. So it's a matching process, and Atlas Core manages that matching process. So make sure you describe yourself well in your that will help us match you with a host organization that fits those interests. And sometimes it's not always the perfect fit. We may have, we may have an environmental organization that's really looking for someone in communications, and say your experience is more in fundraising, but you also have a specialty in an environmental background. So you may not be the perfect fit for that organization. So because they may be looking for someone with a very specific background, like a social media background, and it's just not quite the right fit, even though the interest, the issue that the organization is working for interests you a lot. So you may get an interview with an organization that is looking for a fundraiser, but they specialize in education. And you're like, well, I'm more interested in the environment than in education, but your skill set may be a really good fit for that organization, and it may be a really useful professional development for you to focus on that skill, as opposed to your interest area. We try and find organizations that match both the skill and the interest areas, but it's not always a perfect fit. We try and match as best as we can. So, we try and match people ourselves, but it's also up to you to determine whether it's a good fit. So if you may make it to the finalist stage, you may be interviewing with the host organization. We encourage all our finalists to, if they're offered an interview, to take that interview. But that's their time. That's your time to ask during the interview and determine whether it's a good fit for you. And sometimes like I said, something that doesn't seem like a good fit on the surface may actually be a really great opportunity for you. So make sure to ask questions and determine whether it's a good fit for you. You're not obligated to accept an offer from a host organization, although offers are very rare. And if you turn one down, the chances of getting placed again are very slim, but we do want it to be a mutual good fit on both sides, both the host organization and the fellow. And if there's organizations that you'd like to be matched with, you can suggest them, but there's no guarantee that you'd be placed there. If there is an organization that you've already worked with in the U.S. In the past, like say you've worked with their branch in your home country and you have contacts with their U.S. branch, that may be helpful in placing you. So if you do have contacts, we prefer and try to place you with, but we find that Atlas Corps knows more of the details about what is required of a host organization, so we're able to make those explanations ourselves. So we'd say Atlas Corps is in charge of the matching process. Don't contact any potential host organizations unless you typically received an interview or an interview request or an offer, but we'll take care of the rest. Like I said, you can make suggestions, but there's no guarantee, and we encourage you to always contact us first and not contact host organizations yourselves.
Okay. And once I'm accepted by a host organization and I'm sure that it matches my interest, then what my role in that host organization will be?
Great. So we have a wide range of roles that our fellows fill, and it could be anything from report writing and research to fundraising, grant management. We've had fellows who are doing direct service and social work. We've had fellows who are doing trainings, event plannings. There's just so many different things that our fellows do. It's a wide range of roles. The one thing that is in common with all of them is that it's not an internship. There are high expectations from the host organization of the fellow, but fellows also have a say in defining what they do there, and so what your role there can change over time, but host organizations often are looking for a very specific set of skills, and that's but there's a wide range of different skills that they may be looking for.
Yeah. And I like the next question because it's not only about host organization and then how the fellow experience outside the host organization looks like.
Yeah, so we have a really close-knit fellow community where fellows really do get a chance to exchange cross-cultural traditions and really, you know, the woman from Nigeria can become best friends with the woman from Pakistan. So, you know, it's a really close-knit community of fellows from over 50 different countries. And a lot of our fellows live together, especially if they're placed in Washington, D.C., and that's also a great chance to get to know others outside of your own you know, country or even region. Fellows do social activities together. We also all come together 3 times a year for our training program. And we have fellow committees that also try to boost social activities and plan things for the fellows to do together. So we have a pretty tight-knit community. There's also further opportunities for professional development, like conferences and events that our fellows go to. A lot of our fellows went to the Social Good Summit this past year, as well as Nexus, Clinton Global Initiative. Those are some of the events that our fellows have gone to in the past year. So there's also a lot of opportunities for professional development, and even within the host cities where fellows are serving. There's always events and trainings going on for fellows to do outside of their host organization.
Mm-hmm. Another part of the experience is the housing experience.
Yeah.
So where will I live?
Yeah. Housing is ultimately the responsibility of the fellow. In D.C., though, we do have some group houses that are managed externally, and housing there is not guaranteed. It's first come, first served. We have a limited number of spaces. Generally, we've had enough places for most fellows, but you know, it is limited, and you can also choose to live on your own, which a number of our fellows, even the ones in D.C., have chosen to do. And if you are living in group housing managed by Atlas Corps, you would be living in a cross-cultural environment. Most of our fellows are living with fellows of many different countries, which
yes,
I know Carolina did.
Yes.
And that really adds to the experience and really allows you to make friends from different countries. In other cities outside of DC, the host organization there also can make suggestions of where to look for housing and what are some of your options, but you may have to do some searching on your own. So we can suggest researches and point you in the right direction, but finding housing is ultimately the responsibility of the fellow.
Mm-hmm. You already talked a little bit about the stipend, but what is the budget like?
Mm-hmm. So the stipend should cover food, shared housing, and local transportation. It's not enough for going out a lot, living in an expensive apartment, or travel and tourism, or it's really not meant for emergencies. It is manageable if you budget. So some fellows have found it helpful that if you're going to be doing some of those things, like traveling around the country, or going out to eat a lot, or maybe want to live in a nicer apartment, some fellows are using some of their personal funds. Mm-hmm. But the budget should be enough for basic needs. The budget varies, and the stipend itself varies on cost of living in the different cities. In Washington, D.C., it's around $1,360 right now, and it's a slightly more in New York. It's a little bit more in San Francisco, which is a more expensive city to live in. It might be a little bit less in some of the cities in the Midwest, like Minneapolis and Des Moines. So it varies on cost of living. And it's actually based on the amount that American volunteers receive. So it is manageable if you budget.
Yes, I'm completely sure, and I live with that, and I live pretty good. I had enough to eat, to live, to mobilize, to even have my buy some other things that is
Yeah.
not necessary.
Right. Yeah.
I mean, it's an oath, and if
Yeah.
you take care of your finances, and you are responsible, and you plan your budget pretty well, it's an oath, and it's gonna be okay.
Yeah. Right. It's a challenge, but it is manageable.
Yeah.
And a lot of fellows feel like they've learned a lot about budgeting from living on that tight budget.
And because some fellows are very close to their family, can they bring their families here?
Sure. So we do discourage people from bringing their family. The stipend and the health insurance are only intended for one person. So the stipend is really not enough to cover your spouse or your children or whoever you might like to bring with you. We also don't sponsor visas for family. So if you're trying to bring your spouse or your child, your mother, whoever, we would not sponsor a visa for them. You would be in charge of getting a visa for them. And so chances are, in almost all cases, people are apart from their families for a year. Families can come visit, and getting a tourist visa is something that a number of our fellows' family members have done, but it would be entirely up to you, and you'd be entirely responsible for the expenses of that. That being said, we have it's not unallowed. It is something that fellows have done before. Fellows have brought their family here with them before in a few rare cases, and they entirely covered the expenses related to bringing their family here and took care of the visas themselves. So it was not something that Atlas Corps did for them. It was something that they did on their own, and in most cases that will be very difficult. So you should plan to be apart for the year.
Yes. Now let's talk about the training sessions.
Mm-hmm.
What shall I expect of the training sessions?
Sure. So our Global Leadership Lab is something that has really grown over time, even since when Carolina was here. We have 12 training days a year that are split up into 3 4-day immersions, is what we call them. And in these immersions, we invite experts from the nonprofit sector to speak on some of the topics that our fellows themselves have determined to be the most important topics that they'd like to learn. So things like financial management, communications, and fundraising. These are some of the topics that we're talking about in our immersions and hearing from experts in participatory practical trainings. We also supplement that with monthly webinars. In fact, we have a webinar later today. And these can be either adding to some of the topics that we cover in our immersions, or they can be subject or content related. So someone could do a webinar on LGBT issues in the international space, and we actually had a fellow lead a webinar on that. So fellows can lead webinars too and share their experiences as well. And then we also supplement all of this with some online discussions and readings that we share with the fellows. It's not a full-time class. Don't think that this is like a student, like being a student. It's not a graduate program. It's not at that level, but we do have some readings that our fellows do. So that's the training program throughout the year. Most of your training will come from your host organization itself. You'll spend most of your training time at your host organization, but we do have this training program, the Global Leadership Lab, to supplement that.
Okay. And what about the post-fellowship activities and engagement?
Great. So we do require that fellows return back to their home country at the end of the fellowship for at least a year. And a lot of fellows ask, is it okay if I'm going back to my home region as opposed to my specific country? And that's usually fine. The main requirement is that you're not just staying in the U.S. after the fellowship. And that and fellows also ask, can I come back for graduate school? That would be acceptable in the program, but you would have to apply for a waiver of our home residency requirement. So it would be deferred for, you could potentially come back for grad school at the end of your fellowship, as long as you have a feasible plan for returning to your home country, and then your home residency, the 1-year home residency requirement would just be deferred for a year. There's also some State Department requirements related to a 2-year home residency requirement that it doesn't apply to everyone, and it doesn't even affect most of our fellows. If you have specific questions about that, you can email us, I won't go into the details of the State Department visa requirements. But basically, we're looking for everyone to return home at the end of the fellowship for at least a year, ideally longer, and to continue work in the social sector. So we've had fellows who continue to engage with the host organization that they served at, like Carolina and some of our others, or other fellows have gone on to work with other organizations and have really used the skills that they have learned in the fellowship and have been able to take their careers to higher heights by using the skills and the network that they've joined as part of the fellowship. And we still have alumni, reach out to the Atlas Core Network and say, hey, I'm doing this project and I'm looking for someone who knows an M&E or a monitoring and evaluation expert in Pakistan. Does anyone know something like that? And fellows will chime in and like, oh, I know someone that you should connect with, or have you thought about this? We have a really active alumni community where that is still communicating with each other. And there's some other ways that we engage alumni. Alumni have access to our Global Leadership Lab online trainings, like our monthly webinars. And we also try and seek out other professional development opportunities for our alumni, such as a career account on devx.com, which is an international development website that we've allowed our fellows to have a heavily discounted account on. So we're always looking for more ways to engage our alumni and find professional development opportunities for our alumni as well. And if you would like to read more about our alumni, I encourage you to go to our website. And if you go to, we have a page for fellows, and if you click on alumni, you can see a map of the world and click on various countries and see which alumni we had there and what some of our greatest success stories are. So that's a little bit about our program, and hopefully we answered some of the questions you may have had about Atlas Core. If you have further questions, email apply@atlascore.org. That's APPLY at atlascore, spelled ATLASCORPS.org. That's the best way to get in touch. Be patient with your responses. It can take up to a week, at least, or around a week to respond sometimes. But we do try and answer all our questions in there. And you can even use the subject line "question from a webinar participant" to make sure we see your question. So again, that email address is apply@atlascore.org. And now we're going to take some questions from the viewers. You can enter your questions in the comments box on YouTube, and we'll be here for at least another 10 minutes. If you have any questions, you can direct them towards me, the senior program manager, and I can tell you a little bit more about the application process or things like that. If you're interested more in the fellow experience, Carolina can take any questions you might have. So we are open to your questions. Thank you so much for viewing our webinar, and we'll be looking forward to your questions now.
Thank you.
So the first question we've gotten from Youngwon Kim is, because you're looking for professionals that have already worked in the field, would it be less attractive if the applicant has spent the past few years in the USA? So first of all, I do want to clarify, just because you it's not necessarily that we're looking for people who have worked in the field. A lot of our fellows do office work. In fact, most of our fellows are doing office work in their fellowship. So even if you've worked in an office as opposed to like a field position, that still qualifies. But if I understand your question, you're looking for, people who have worked abroad versus people who have worked in the U.S. It's okay. You are still eligible to apply for the fellowship if you've spent the last few years in the U.S. We've had a number of fellows who have done previous training programs in the U.S., or they've been here for graduate school or college. We've even had some fellows who maybe one of their parents was a diplomat who lived in the U.S. for part of their lives, so they've lived in the U.S. before. That's totally fine, and it can sometimes even work in your favor because you're more familiar with the U.S. culture. Though certainly, it's not necessarily, we're looking for people who have worked from all over. With the one thing that we're looking for is for people who are looking to return to their home countries for at least a year after the fellowship. So, so if that's your intention to go back to your home country at the end, then I'd say yes, you're eligible. You should go ahead and apply. If you're looking to stay in the U.S., you've been in the U.S. before, and you're hoping to work in the fellowship or work in the U.S. in the future, this may not be the best fit for you. We're looking for people to return home for at least a year. Any other questions? Right. Let's ask away. Feel free to ask. All right, well, we'll stick around for another few minutes if other people have questions, but feel free to ask. All right, someone mentions that they've followed our organization for years and attempted to apply for this fellowship, and that they'll complete their application now. So thank you, Peju, I hope I'm saying that right, but thank you so much for continuing to your interest and starting your application. Let's see. So someone mentions that they're a finalist and that they've filled out our finalist contract, but they haven't received any information from Atlas Corps. So great. A lot of our applicants who are finalists for our January class are still waiting for an update. We are in the selection and placement phase for our fellowship beginning in January. We're still matching people with host organizations. We're still finishing up interviews. So we do ask that people just remain patient a little bit longer. I know it is a very long selection process. We're hoping to notify everyone by mid to late November of their final application status, and we'll let you know if a host organization is considering your application. If you're not placed with a host organization for January and you're a finalist, someone that we've considered as one of our top applicants, then you may still be considered for future classes. And every class we place people who had applied for a previous class. So do please be patient, and we look forward to being in touch later in November. Okay, someone else mentions that they've filled in their application and have yet to receive an update. It depends when you filled it out. If you applied after, say, July 15th, then your application is being considered for May, not for our January class, because July 15th was our priority deadline for our January class. So your application may still be under consideration for our May class. If you applied for our January class, like I said, we're still working on the selection and process, and we'll be notifying everyone of their final application status by mid to late November. And thank you for your patience. I realize it's a very long process and we can't notify people as soon as we'd like to, but you know, there's a lot of steps to the process, and host organizations also do interviews on different schedules, so we are working very hard to place people. Someone else asks, if you are a finalist, is it always the case that the host organization will interview? Is there a situation where you may be accepted by a host organization without going through an interview with them? Yes, it's pretty much always the case that the host organization will interview you and you know, try and determine whether it's a good fit. In a few very rare cases, we have had fellows who have worked with an organization in their home countries before, or sometimes even in the U.S. before, and the host organization tells us, you know, we'd like to bring this fellow on. We've worked with them before, and they don't even necessarily need to do an interview because they've already worked with them. So, you know, for example, International Relief and Development, you know, had worked with someone from Iraq before, and they decided that they wanted to take that fellow. And I'm not sure if they even did an interview. You know, we have another fellow from Malawi who's serving. Yeah. Also with Carolina. Yes. So we've had some fellows who were already involved with their organization and didn't necessarily have to do that interview, but in almost all cases, I'd say 95% of our fellows, they probably even more, like 98% of our fellows have had to do an interview with their host organization, and that's really your chance to sell yourself and learn, you know, really try and impress the host organization about why they should take you over other applicants that they've seen, and it's also your chance to learn more about the host organization. Great. So our next question is, what would you say distinguishes you from other fellowships? Also, if you obtain a green card in the application process, does it interfere with getting accepted? So I'll take those separately. So as far as distinguishing us from other fellowships, that's a great question. There's not a lot of other fellowships like us out there that bring people from around the world here to the U.S. So it's very, very common for Americans to go abroad and do volunteer work or work in, you know, work in the nonprofit sector. For example, the U.S. Peace Corps is a program that does that. There are much fewer opportunities for people abroad to come and serve here in the U.S. with nonprofits. So that in itself is somewhat of a distinction from a lot of the other nonprofit programs out there. As far as some of the other programs that do international fellowships, I can think of, for example, Global Health Corps and the Acumen Global Fellow Program, both of which are partners of Atlas Corps, you know, organizations that we work with. One thing that distinguishes us from them is that we, it's a very broad interests and broad skill sets that fellows bring to the table and that fellows are working on. So fellows may, like I said, come here to work on issues of education or the environment or social entrepreneurship, social work. There's a lot of different things that our fellows come and work on, whereas some of the other fellowship programs out there are very specific in what they do. You know, they just focus on public health, or they just focus on social enterprise and business practices. So we have, you know, pretty much any issue you name, our fellows have worked on it. Yeah, I'd say those are the main things that distinguish us. It's also something that's a paid fellowship. There's a lot of programs out there that are unpaid, totally up to you to pay your way here in order to do an internship or a trainee fellowship. And that's something unique about us. Also, the fact that it's a 12-month fellowship with the option to extend for 6 months. A lot of programs out there are not that long. So there's a lot of exchange programs that are just 3 months or sometimes even 3 weeks. We are a significant length of experience here that you'll be getting. So those are some of the things that we, I think, distinguish ourselves, and also the diversity of our network. We have right now 206 fellows from 54 different countries. So a lot of diversity in our network that you'd be joining. The second question I wanted to answer from this gentleman is, or female, is that if you obtain a green card in the application process, does it interfere with getting accepted, even if you intend to return to your home country? So something that this is somewhat of a new, fellows are only eligible to join, or applicants are only eligible if they are not a legal permanent resident or a dual citizen. So dual citizens and legal permanent residents or green card holders are not eligible for the fellowship, even if they have intentions to return to their home country. There's a lot of reasons for that. It gets complicated with taxes. It gets complicated with health insurance, and it's just something where it's much more difficult to return home at the end of the fellowship. So this is at the moment, that's our current policy for future applicants, and we haven't always had this policy. It's relatively new, but for future applicants, that's our policy. So it would affect your eligibility for the program if you have been if you've received a green card while you're applying. Someone else mentioned, I've just started my application and I'm interested in an LGBT organization. I've worked a little in that field. Most of my experience is in education. Would it be less attractive if I don't have much experience in the field I'm more interested in? Yeah, so I'd say generally, the most successful applicants are someone who's usually had some experience in the field that they go into with when they do the fellowship. That being said, I still encourage you to apply, and there may be organizations that are looking for a particular skill set, and maybe it doesn't matter as much that you don't have experience in that field. They're just looking for someone who's interested in working in that field. So we have had host organizations come to us and say, we're not necessarily looking for experience in case management and social work, but we're just looking for someone who has experience or who has an interest in gaining experience in that field. We have an organization right now that the main role of the fellow there is doing event planning and planning this major conference there, and they're looking for, it's an organization that works on peace and conflict resolution. However, they selected a fellow who didn't have as much experience in that field, but they had the right skill set. And so it was a great fit, even if they didn't have a lot of experience in that particular field. So, even if the field that you're interested in doesn't exactly match the field that you have more experience in, I'd still encourage you to go ahead and apply. So the next question we've received is, and these will be the last two questions, the last two questions that people have asked. I've submitted my application, but my reference is yet to respond. Hope that won't stop my application from being processed. So we'll still process your application even if your recommendations haven't been turned in yet. And I do want to mention that you have up to 2 weeks after you submit your application, or 2 weeks after the application deadline, to turn in your recommendations. So, so the application deadline is November 8th. So 2 weeks after that is really the deadline for turning in your recommendations, because we realize that it takes some time to get those recommendations. So we'll still process your application. We do encourage you to make sure that you have 2 recommendations. The requirement is 2 applications, and you can submit up to 3. But we'll still process your application even if you don't. But better applications, and you're going to go farther in the application process if you have 2 recommendations. And then the last question I'm going to take is there any possibility to work 10 hours a week to cover some expenses? No, unfortunately, the fellowship is just intended to be a volunteer and training experience. It would actually be a violation not just of your Atlas Corps Fellow Agreement, but also a violation of your J1 trainee visa to be working outside of your host organization to earn a little bit extra money, and it would also affect your taxes as well. So you would not be able to work part-time to supplement those expenses, unfortunately. But like we've said, the budget is very challenging to work with. It's a tight budget, but we do believe it is manageable to cover basic expenses. And some fellows have found it useful to bring some of their own personal savings to cover additional expenses that may come up. But working outside of your host organization during the fellowship as kind of a part-time work would not be allowed, unfortunately. So thank you for all your fantastic questions. I really appreciate you tuning in. We will be, this webinar was recorded, so we'll be sending out a link to everyone who signed up on our Eventbrite invitation. We'll also be posting the link on social media and on our website. So so you'll be able to come back to this later if this is your first, if you're hoping to review the information later. So thank you so much for tuning in, and we look forward to some great applications.
Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.